So, good evening and welcome. I am Ritu Sethi, Director of the League of Artisans. The League of Artisans is a community interest company that aims to promote artisanal skills as a response to global challenges, trusting in the transformational power of knowledge to create alternative futures. So, on behalf of my other co-directors, Saul Maranucci and Carrie Sommers, I would welcome you all to today's webinar. This webinar is the first of the many events planned for the Leek Textile Weekend. The weekend celebrates Leek's rich textile heritage through this online talk and a series of community-focused activities and exhibitions that are to be held on site on January 20th and 21st. And for those of you who can, I would urge you to try and visit. For more details, do check out the League of Artisans website, our Instagram page, and other links that we have posted on the chat box. But before I proceed with the events of today, just a bit of housekeeping. First, thank you for responding to the online poll. And while we would have loved to have seen you and heard your voices, for reasons of technology, all attendees, the audio of all attendees is muted and your video has been turned off. However, do post your questions to the panelists on the Q&A on the link below. And if you wish, do specify who you are addressing the question to, if you would like a specific speaker to respond. Also, do send in your comments and suggestions in the chat box. At the end of the webinar, we would be grateful if you could again respond to two questions that are posed for your suggestions on the topics of our future talks. This webinar is being recorded as we plan to post it onto our YouTube channel for those unable to attend today. The Leek Textile Weekend is supported using public funding by the National Lottery through Arts Council England and is part funded by UK government through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund in the form of a Cultural Arts and Heritage Grant from SMDC, as well as funding and support from Outside Arts. Our thanks to all of them. I also wish to thank the British Council for their technical support for the webinar. And now on to the main event. As there are so many different aspects to Leek's textile history that are waiting to be explored, this webinar today is just one in a series of 6 that we will be holding under the umbrella title of Textiles Transformed, from Leek to Liberty via India. Today, we will be examining just a part of these many aspects. Our amazing speakers will cover the intricacies of the art and craft movement, the historic collaboration between William Morris and Sir Thomas Wardle, the continuing tradition of Indian raw silk and its connections with Leek and other continuities. I will be introducing each speaker before their presentation, and I'm delighted to start by introducing Róisín Inglesby. Róisín is a curator at the William Morris Gallery, where she focuses on Morris's global connections and international arts and crafts movements. Recent exhibitions have included Pioneers, William Morris and the Bauhaus, Distant Fellowships, Morris and South Asia, and Young Poland, 1890 to 1918, an arts and craft movement. And this exhibition won the AAH Curatorial Prize. Following her curatorial roles at the Victoria and Albert Museum and historic royal palaces, Róisín worked at the Teien Museum in Tokyo, where she assisted in creating greater accessibility for non-Japanese visitors. Her forthcoming exhibition and publication planned for March, is on Art Without Heroes, Mingei, and focuses on the origins, interpretations, and contemporary implications of the Japanese folk art movement. Róisín, over to you.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will share my screen now. So hopefully that will work. Great. I can't see anybody now, but Ritu, would you just tell me whether this is working properly?
It's working perfectly.
Great, lovely. So I am here to talk to you about Distant Fellowship, which was an exhibition that we did at William Morris Gallery in 2021. And here is a nice little starting point for you to see the kind of the taster of the exhibition. Some of you might know the William Morris Gallery, some of you will not, but this is the scene. So the William Morris Gallery is it's the largest collection of Morris's work anywhere in the world. It's also the largest freely accessible collection, public collection. We are owned by the local authority, which is the London Borough of Waltham Forest, and the museum has been here since 1950. The building, of course, is much older. The building is from the 1740s. And William Morris actually lived here when he was a child in the 1840s. So it has a lot of history. You can tell it's a historic building, but it's also a very traditional space, a traditional building. So in recent years, especially, we try and sort of activate the space in more contemporary ways, and also in ways that make more sense to the local population in Walthamstow. Of course, when Morris lived here, this was a rural area, you know, around the house there was big gardens, and around that there were fields with sheep and cows, etc. But of course now we're in London, we're in Zone 3, it's very urbanized, very industrial, and we have a really interesting, diverse and very young population. So Waltham Forest is more than 50% made up of people from global majority backgrounds. We're also a very young population. The average age is younger than in the rest of the United Kingdom. So we really do try and encourage these audiences to feel comfortable and at home in the gallery, which, as you can see from the outside, is, you know, quite a traditional and potentially sort of imposing place. So the exhibition was created by Studio Karom, who are a fantastic duo, Priya Sundram and Nia Thandapani, who are based in India and the UK, between the two countries. And they were actually our artists in residence a couple of years prior to this exhibition. So they'd done work based around Morris's connections with South Asia, and they came to me with an exhibition proposal to kind of bring this work more to life, and also to think about how the building, the space could be activated. I was very keen right from the very beginning to make sure this was a really collaborative process, and also to try and relinquish a fair amount of curatorial control, so that Priya and Nia would have the space to really do what they wanted with the museum, and to make space for new voices, and to kind of give a degree of ownership, not just of their exhibition, but actually to the gallery as a whole, to Priya and Nia, so that what they were doing felt kind of integrated within the whole museum, not sort of a tokenistic corner, but actually kind of a challenge, if you like, to the temporary and permanent exhibition collection, and also to think about how these spaces can be reinterpreted for contemporary audiences. I said that the building can be a bit imposing, and we definitely try hard to make people feel welcome when they come. So part of Priya and Nia's fantastic idea was to really extend that welcome in a variety of different languages. So we had Urdu, we had Tamil, and we had English, because Urdu and Tamil are two of the major community languages. After English, Urdu, then Polish, and then Tamil are the three most of the popular languages. So it was really important to us that people walking down the street knew that there was something here that might relate to them, to their heritage, and to feel welcome. the language extended into the gallery space itself, and you can see here the kind of the main installation space. So what you can see is this fantastic fabric, and I'll talk more about that later, that formed the centerpiece of the exhibition. But the fabric was sort of the biggest output from Priya and Nia's research. And this was based on a design by William Morris trellis, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but reinterpreted for a local and a South Asian context. So of course the colors are different, and I'll show you some close-ups in a minute to show how Morris's classic design was reinterpreted for Priya and Nia's exhibition. You can also see in the view here a bookshelf with lots of green books. And this was a book that Priya and Nia wrote and designed. It's actually available as a digital download on the William Morris Gallery shop. And also I did share it with Ritu, so perhaps it's available through the publicity around this talk as well. But if anyone has problems accessing it, then please do get in touch and I can send that on. It's a fantastic resource that Priya and Nia made based on their research about Morris and South Asia. So it was wonderful to have all this information in one space. The books were originally printed and freely available, but we unfortunately didn't have funding to make them available to everyone all the time. So once the initial batch had been taken home by people, we decided that a digital way was the best way forward. Back to the woodblocks. So as I mentioned, Priya and Nia designed a woodblock print based on Morris's own woodblock print trellis design. This was designed and cut by artisans in India, and you can see there the cutting stage, the incredibly detailed cutting process, and then the beginning of the printing process with the different layers of the woodblocks. As I'm sure you know, woodblock printing was one of William Morris's sort of major well, innovations isn't the right word because, of course, people had been doing it for thousands of years and continue to do it. But in Britain, by the 19th century, woodblock printing was not commonly used anymore, and so it was an innovation for Morris to go back to this traditional and very beautiful way of making. And we agreed very much throughout the exhibition process that the kind of the slight blurriness, the imperfections that you get through woodblock printing, where the registration hasn't been absolutely perfect, is one of the nicest and most tactile, beautiful things, and it's why Morris's textiles, I think, still speak to us so clearly today. And it was wonderful to see a contemporary interpretation of this process. And this is part of the fantastic design that Priya and Nia made. So in the original trellis, it's a rose trellis, which they then altered into this kind of pattern shape. In the original design, there are birds that are indigenous to England. Here, of course, we have the parakeets, which, of course, you will find in South Asia. But strangely, you also find in Walthamstow in East London. We have troops of parakeets who I guess have escaped from captivity at some stage, and so they do live in our local park. So that's nice. Also, the foliage obviously is an adapted form of Morris's foliage pattern, and then the very strong repeating print that was, of course, indicative of Morris's original design. We also had the blocks themselves on display, showing the various colours and the various sections, which was a really important part of the exhibition, so that people could really understand so clearly, how these layers of beautiful colour and pattern had been built up in the same way that Morris would have been familiar with. And here is some examples of the finished piece. So the room itself was meant to be a very welcoming domestic space. We had chairs, we had these floor cushions, we had furniture, we had books, to sort of invite people just to kind of sit and be and feel comfortable in the surroundings, as well as taking in the beautiful pattern fabric design. We also did a series of interventions around the museum space. So I mentioned that I really wanted the exhibition to be integrated throughout the museum. And within reason, and this is the parameters that I gave to Priya and Nia, was that they could essentially do whatever they wanted. I was not going to interfere or sort of censor them in any way. The only limitations were budget. This was shortly after the pandemic, or still during the pandemic period, really. And so, of course, budgets were an issue. We are a local authority museum. We are free to enter. And we are sponsored by the local council, but that obviously means we don't have unlimited budgets. So there was a budgetary constraint. The other constraint was that this is a historic building, so we have to be quite mindful of how we do things, in the sense of we can't just kind of glue things to the walls, we can't hang things from the ceilings, we have to be kind of work with the fabric of the 18th century building. So they were the only two constraints. But other than that, I was really keen that Priya and Mia had free reign, basically, to do whatever they wanted. We therefore put a series of objects by contemporary South Asian makers, both local and based in India and Pakistan, and sort of scattered them around, almost hid them amongst the regular museum objects. We differentiated them with the yellow labels that you see on the left-hand side here. And so it almost made like a sort of treasure trail almost, where you could go around and find these objects. But equally, if you were looking at the Morris collections, you would then maybe see them sort of almost by accident. So what we see here is a masala daba by the very talented Pipoi and by Venkatesh Chinappa. And this is a really nice example of a kind of everyday useful object. So of course, I'm sure many of you are aware that Morris is all about kind of, well, the useful and the beautiful, so the functional as well as the nicely designed. So it was really important to have some objects within this that were extremely functional, but also masterpieces of contemporary design. And this works really beautifully, I think, with the metalwork that you see on the shelf above, which of course is half British on the right-hand side and half South Asian on the left-hand side. Another intervention that we did was in the first gallery that you come into. So this gallery is called Meet the Man, and it's about William Morris, about who he was, about his design, about his many sort of interests, and about him as a Renaissance man, essentially. And in the interpretation here, it says Morris was a designer, a maker, a politician, a writer, and also a storyteller. And this idea about Morris being a storyteller was beautifully taken up in the Useful and Beautiful project and the Kavad, which you see here on the left and the right, respectively. So I don't need to tell you, of course, I'm sure many of you, what a Kavad is. It's a portable story box. So a storyteller would go around and they'd have this box which kind of closes up and then it opens out as the story unfolds and progresses. And this is a fairly contemporary, so 10-year-old box about the education of the young woman. And in parallel to that, we had by Vasu Salamuthu, who is an Indian artist who has lived in Walthamstow for many years. She made a similar one based on the William Morris Gallery. So the architecture of her storybox is relating to the gallery, and it's about sort of the idea about home and what is useful, what is beautiful, and how the objects in our home sort of make us feel, well, essentially comfortable there, at home there. So this was a really nice tie-in, not only with Morris as storyteller, but also with this idea of this was Morris's home, and the gallery is a domestic building. Morris lived there, his family lived there. So what is it about a home that really makes us feel at home? And that's an especially interesting question, given that Waltham Forest is an area where a lot of people from around the world have made their home. And so, what are the trappings and the kind of the decorative details and the objects that these people have brought with them, perhaps, to make home feel that way. And this is another, just a close-up of this really beautiful story box. We also had in this gallery, so this gallery is called The Ideal Book, and it's about Morris's printing endeavours, his typography, his book design, his graphic design. And you will see on the left here the telltale yellow label next to this book, Tamil, a biography. Tamil, of course, is one of the community languages of Waltham Forest, and it was really important for us to think about both the language and the typography. So the design here had been redrawn, and the idea of Tamil as a kind of visual language as well as a spoken and a heard language was really important in this aspect, and that mirrors very nicely with Morris's own ventures into typography. Of course, Morris understood a book as a visual thing as well as a kind of a conveyor of information, and he's very interested in typographic design and in sort of texture of pages and the sort of materiality of the book. And so this idea that you get sort of specifically, in Islamic and other South Asian cultures as well, about the sort of the visibility of the word and sort of script and lettering was something that I think is really interesting, and something that Morris would have known about because he was an expert in the art of the sort of Middle East and Islamic world, as well as knowing about sort of India. And it was really nice for us to be able to have the Tamil script around the building and in this gallery in particular. In order to help navigate these alternative objects and also the gallery more generally, we, Priya Anir designed this fantastic guide to the gallery. So you can see the kind of the graphic design is very similar to the fabric that they made, but around the outside of the front page here, it's actually one of Morris's patterns that they've used to kind of to blend this together. And so the guide took you around the gallery and introduced you to different objects from a variety of perspectives, written by people within the community who have sort of links either to Morris or to South Asian community, and asked them for their interpretations of the objects and how you might see them differently if you come from a different perspective. This was really important to me also in terms of kind of seeding curatorial control and thinking about the curatorial voice, that it's not just, my voice that the visitor hears through reading the labels when they're going around, but actually the idea that there are many voices and therefore many interpretations of the objects. And you can see, I can see this is obviously a rough draft page that I have an image of because it's in Latin. And we did not produce it in Latin, but we did produce it in English and in Tamil. So that's me. That's the rest of my slideshow. So hopefully you can see me again. And Ritu, over to you.
Thank you, Róisín. We have actually posted on the link on the chat to the publication A Distant Fellowship. So anybody who wishes to look at it, they can. It's been posted there and I've read it in detail, and it is really interesting, very insightful. And what I enjoyed reading about it also was it gave a 21st century perspective to a time that was not an easy time for other countries that were colonized. So the balance was very well done. So thank you very much, Róisín, for your talk. And our next speaker now is Emma. Emma Ferry is a design historian whose research interests relate to Victorian fashion and interior design. Her most recent publications include a chapter on 19th century furniture books for the Bloomsbury series, A Cultural History of Furniture, and an article for Victorian Review on Mrs. Oliphant's advice book on dress in Macmillan's Art at Home series. Alongside teaching of design at the University of Gloucestershire in Cheltenham, she is currently undertaking research on the life and work of the designer Kate Faulkner. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Ritu, and thank you, Róisín. That was amazing. I'm really looking forward to how our paint to each other, so that's lovely. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen now. Here we go. So I hope I can see anything, so I hope everybody else can see that now. Is that okay, Ritu?
Well, I'm getting a black, yes, perfect.
Super. So thank you. I'd like to talk about a chapter on William Morris's Strawberry Thief, which I wrote for a book titled Iconic Designs. Sorry, I'm just having trouble moving this forward. It doesn't seem to want to move. Oh, here we go. So here's the context. So it's a story, a chapter on William Morris's Strawberry Thief, which I wrote for this book called Iconic Designs, 50 Stories About 50 Things. And you can just make out, if you look in the bottom right corner, there's our Strawberry Thief, sandwiched between Barbie and the Sydney Opera House. There we go. So I was asked by my editor, Grace Lees Maffey, to contribute one of the stories about one of the things in the fourth part of the book, which was called Home Rules. And this considers objects designed for or found around the home. And as you can see from this slide, this section in the book contains 10 very different things which were chosen as iconic designs. And as my research and expertise interests focus on 19th century interior design and decoration, I was commissioned to write about Morris's furnishing fabric, Strawberry Thief, which was designed, patented and manufactured in 1883. So this was my focus, my object to write about. Fortunately, my editor gave me a very strict brief, and all the other contributing authors. We had to produce a chapter that was engaging, thoughtful, accessible, and entertaining. We had to consider it in terms of three main features. So the ideation and production, the initial reception and consumption, and its legacy and influence. We were allowed to use 3 to 4 subheadings, which should be short, descriptive, dramatic, or entertaining. And we had to refer to primary sources where possible, using secondary sources critically to tell an engaging and informative story. I was allowed to use this object as a route for discussion of other objects relating typologically, chronologically, through authorship, or by some other thematic connection. I also had to respond to the overarching volume-wide discussion of what was meant by iconic. We were all given the Oxford English Dictionary definition to work with, which designates a person or thing regarded as representative of a particular cultural movement, something important or influential in a particular cultural context. This rationale for the book asks, what do we mean when we say that a design is iconic? How does that term aid our understanding of design and of iconicity? Essentially, I had to justify the inclusion of Morris's Strawberry Thief furnishing fabric in a book on iconic design. And I had to do this in 1,750 words. I was allowed 250 for notes. So what I'd like to explain today is the process of putting this chapter together and examining the research materials that I'd identified and the ideas that I wanted to express in my chapter. And by a very happy coincidence, these relate to the themes of this event, and I hope will follow a thread from Leek to Liberty via India. And I think this is a lovely little nod also to the fabric that Róisín's just shown us, because we're back to birds. These are thrushes, not parrots there, unfortunately. So, like every good design historian, I began by identifying my secondary sources to establish what other historians had already said about this design. And I'm sure you will appreciate the problem with working on anything to do with Morris is there is just so much written about him. There are analysis of his writings, his poetry and news from nowhere, his political activities, his work as a conservationist, his private life, Morris & Co. as a business venture, and other important areas of his design work, the Kelmscott press, church decoration, interior design, furniture, stained glass, tiles, decoration, wallpaper, calligraphy, wood engraving, and textiles. And such an overwhelming amount of material makes research difficult. You have to be really careful in evaluating and selecting, as the texts range from those lavishly illustrated coffee table books to the Morris experts, the scholarly articles produced in the Journal of William Morris Studies. Fortunately, my central concern was this single iconic object, Strawberry Thief, which helped to limit my research to key themes, which were the origins of the design, Morris's hand-printed textiles, particularly in indigo discharge and block printing, surviving original examples, its exhibition and use, and its continued appeal. And so working from my secondary sources, I was quickly able to identify my primary sources, those original objects, images and texts which I needed to examine. These were held in several collections, both in the UK and in the States, and included samples of the original fabric and the blocks used to print the design, both held at the V&A, and the Merton Abbey dye book in the Berger collection at the Huntington in California, details the ingredients and the timings and the processes involved. I also contacted several textile companies who produced Strawberry Thief since the 1940s, so Liberty, Warner, Morris & Co. and the John Lewis Partnership. And then there were the references to Strawberry Thief, all the techniques involved in its production and published primary sources. Morris's own writings, his lectures and essays on pattern design and textiles and dyeing offered really useful insights. His letters to Thomas Wardle over the period 1875 to 78 offered a really fascinating glimpse into their experiments and the results their collaborations achieved at the dye vats and Wardle's Hencroft works in Leek. One to his elder daughter, Jenny, even mentions the printing of Strawberry Thief. He writes, "Let's see, what news? Not much. I was a great deal at Merton last week, though I didn't sleep there, anxiously superintending the first printing of the Strawberry Thief, which I think we shall manage this time." His younger daughter and biographer, May Morris, also provided information about Strawberry Thief in her chapter on Morris, a designer. Strawberry Thief appears also in catalogues issued by Morris & Co. from about 1883 onwards. And I also tracked down the only surviving reproduction of the original colour design for Strawberry Thief, published in a special edition of the Studio in 1934 to coincide with the centenary exhibition of William Morris held at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And so from these materials and many other threads, I began to weave together that story of Strawberry Thief, beginning with its ideation and its production, which I called Rascally Thrushes and Indigo Vats. So Strawberry Thief is one of William Morris's best known designs, often described as iconic. This endearing furnishing fabric resulted from Morris's careful study of natural forms and his painstaking experiments with organic dyes. As you can see, it's a formal, mirrored repeat pattern depicting pairs of birds set among stylized summer flowers and foliage and fruit. The red strawberries of the design are very similar to those illustrated in Gerard's Herbal, but the birds, a significant motif in Morris's textiles designs, are based on his close observation of nature. And here I think you can just about pick out the birds in this design for Rose. Morris's letters to Wardle also reveal that he practiced drawing birds to feature in his designs. And this skill is apparent in Strawberry Thief, which I suggest depicts two distinct members of the thrush family. The speckled-breasted singers are song thrushes, while the thieves, with their noticeably darker wings, are naughty missile thrushes. And the antics of these birds in the kitchen garden at Morris's home at Kelmscott Manor provided the inspiration for this iconic design. As May Morris recalled, "You can picture my father going out in the early morning and watching the rascally thrushes at work on the fruit beds and telling the gardener I'd like to wring their necks, that no bird in the garden must be touched. There were certainly more birds than strawberries, in spite of attempts at protection." The use of birds in this distinctive turnover pattern is characteristic of the textiles Morris designed from 1876 to 83 and is based upon his study of medieval Italian silks at the South Kensington Museum, now the V&A. The birds play an important role within the design structure. A net framed of variously proportioned diamonds, which is one of the basic forms of pattern construction described in Morris's lecture, Some Hints on Pattern Design. However, as May Morris comments, this net pattern is so concealed that you can scarcely see the construction. It is a very flower garden for colour. And this, as Róisín's already told us, is at a time when British textile industry was dominated by mechanised roller printing. Morris, like Wardle, inspired by the beautiful Indian chintzes they both so admired, decided to reject that and instead to use the ancient technique of block printing. He translated his complex design for Strawberry Thief onto 24 pearwood blocks, expertly carved by Barretts of Bethnal Green. Harewood is a hardwood used for blocks because of its close grain and durability. And you can see from these surviving examples that there's a raised portion of the design which prints precisely. Having rejected machine printing, Morris famously condemned fugitive aniline dyes as the foul blotches of the capitalist dyer, and seemed to have particularly disliked Prussian blue, that brilliant blue mineral dye discovered in about 1810. Influenced instead by the look of old Indian chintz, Morris had in mind the colours of Persian ornament and the primary colours, the red and the blue of medieval art. He turned instead to natural substances, particularly indigo, the great substantive dye, which was probably imported from India, since this was chiefly the quality indigo sold on the world market at the time. Then, living up to his motto, "Ce je puis if I can," Morris and Wardle collaborated, experimenting to develop dyes and printing techniques during 3 intensive working visits to Leek made in the summer of 1875 and the summer of 1877. Wardle noted that the pains Morris took to get his colouring right were immense, as were his powers of resolve and work. And from 1876, based on agreed samples of dye and pigments, most of Morris's chintzes were undertaken by Wardle. In this example, particularly this snake's head, printed by Wardle. However, as I'm sure you know, in 1881, Morris moved his textile production to Moton Abbey in Surrey. Here, having studied the monumental 4-volume treatise of the French chemist Perzos, published in 1846, Morris finally mastered the indigo vat and successfully started to produce designs using the indigo discharge technique. Here you can see the indigo vats on the left, which seem very, very basic, don't they? By 1855, Morris & Co. had registered 17 designs incorporating indigo discharge, including Brother Rabbit, which we can see here, Rose and Thistle, and Bird and Anemone. This technique alone results in a cloth with a design in blue and white. For fabrics where more colours are desired, however, you need to use successive mordant printings. And the Strawberry Thief was Morris's first many-coloured print. The Merton Abbey Dye Book, a handwritten record of the recipes used for printing and samples of fabric produced between 1881 and 92, notes that in printing Strawberry Thief, the cloth comes 3 times on the table. This is an immensely time-consuming process that relied upon the skills of the dyers and printers at Merton Abbey, and it's described in a booklet published by Morris & Co. in 1911. The cotton cloth is first dyed to a uniform dark shade of blue in one of the large indigo vats and is printed with a bleaching reagent, which either reduces or removes the blue colour as required by the design. Mordants are then printed on the white parts where the red has to come, and the whole cloth is dyed a second time with madder. The process is repeated a third time for yellow. The colours are set by passing the fabric through soap at almost boiling point, and the final treatment is to spread the cloth on the grass with its printed face to the sunlight so that the whites may be purified and all the fugitive colour removed in nature's own way. Given its lengthy production process, Strawberry Thief was among the most expensive of Morris & Co.'s printed chintzes. But May Morris suggested that customers who exclaimed at the prices of the many-coloured chintzes would have done well to visit the works and watch the whole printing process of several yards. And this leads me to a consideration of its initial reception and consumption. Printed at 4 and 9 shillings per yard, which is about equivalent to £110 a metre at the moment, it was nonetheless one of the most commercially popular patterns for its appeal. Contemporaries explained by the design's familiarity with nature that makes it human and entertaining. It was registered in May 1883 and soon exhibited by Morris & Co. at the Foreign Fair at Boston, Massachusetts in the winter of that year, where it was displayed as a curtain fabric. The William Morris catalogue, written by George Wardle, suggested the Strawberry Thief would also make a lovely wall covering for a small room. And here we can see it on display at Kelmscott Manor in the dining room, which has been recently refurbished. You can also see it here in the top left as an upholstery weight from the catalogue from 1912. More than 40 years later, Strawberry Thief curtains were used in a display of the room illustrative of the period in 1888 at the British Empire exhibition of 1924. Indicative of its iconic status, Strawberry Thief has since featured in other notable exhibitions, including several at the V&A and, of course, at the William Morris Gallery. And you can just see him perking around over William Morris's eye in that poster. Far from being consigned to museums, though, Strawberry Thief was produced by Morris & Co. using indigo discharge and block printing until the company went into voluntary liquidation in May 1940. Morris & Co. was bought by Sanderson's and Son from the receiver for £400. The original blocks for Strawberry Thief and other Morris designs were bought as part of a settlement of a debt by Stead and Stead McAlpine, the specialist printers and dyers, now part of the John Lewis Partnership. And from 1941, they printed from the blocks for various customers, including Thorpe, Old Bleach Company, Carlisle, and Warner's. But finally, in 1980, the original blocks were handed over to the V&A and hand block printing ceased. 4 years later, Sanderson relaunched Morris & Co. as a separate brand and began producing a range of machine manufactured fabrics, including Strawberry Thief, which you can see here. The design was also rescaled from its original 20.5 by 17.5 inch repeat and produced as a rotary design by Stead McAlpine for Liberty. Liberty first produced Strawberry Thief as a furnishing fabric in 1979, and it's since been redrawn for Tana lawn fabric on a smaller scale. Still recognisable, despite these adaptations to suit different forms of production and different consumers. It is the enduring popularity that I'm going to suggest grants Strawberry Thief its iconic status. If the word iconic has been overused, so too has Strawberry Thief. And this brings me to its legacy and its influence, which I'm calling From If I Can to iPad. Although the print first appeared on Royal Mail postage stamps commemorating British textiles produced in July 1982, its ubiquity really began with the manufacture of Morris merchandise for the V&A exhibition William Morris in 1996. The museum's collection now holds the original blocks, a sample of the chintz, and displays an example of the transfer printed stoneware mug decorated with Strawberry Thief manufactured by Dunoon as a kind of merchandising activity for the V&A exhibition. Certainly since 1996, the number of Strawberry Thief commodities has expanded exponentially, due largely to the use of digital technologies in reproducing patterns, which had already begun when David Shenton gently mocks them in 1996. Machine printed, it's now available in many colorways in both drape and upholstery weights, and as a wallpaper, even though Morris considered that design for a flat surface was one thing and design for a chintz using hanging in folds was another. You can get cushions or make tapestries, either at home using embroidery kits, and to ensure your success, the home stitcher can buy coordinated ranges of Liberty sewing equipment and a sewing box to keep them in. You can buy garments and accessories available in the Liberty version of Strawberry Thief. An innovative collaboration between Liberty and Nike in 2008 resulted in a pair of trainers where 3 signature prints, including Strawberry Thief's, create a perfect juxtaposition with the clean design lines of the Dunk silhouette. In May 2012, Liberty's Wild Nature collaboration with Doc Martens produced a dual-branded version of the equally iconic 8-eye boot decorated with Strawberry Liberty print. And it also had a matching satchel, which I was really tempted by. Aimed at a market with more traditional tastes, Strawberry Thief appears on PVC tote bags and umbrellas. You can get it in gardening tools and kitchen textiles, including this rather alarming red version manufactured by Ulster Weavers. Here, William Morris's painstaking experiments with indigo have been forgotten. My particular non-favourite is this plastic bag dispenser, and one wonders what Morris might have made of this. Many Strawberry Thief items are sold in the shops of heritage organisations with Morris connections, including Kelmscott Manor, the William Morris Gallery, and the National Trust, which owns Morris's Red House and properties with arts and craft movement interiors, notably Whittick Manor. where an example of the chair covered in strawberry thief stands in the great parlour. Kelmscott Manor, with the walls of the dining room are hung with strawberry thief, also sells tea time ceramics that feature the feeding missel thrush and his stolen strawberry. This fugitive rascal has also inspired a range of jewellery and stained glass, even gifts like this little wooden bird by Matt Saul, made exclusively for the V&A. Museums and Gallery Marketing Limited, which manufactures cards and stationery and gifts for the heritage sector, also offers a range of coordinated strawberry thief goods made under license from the V&A. For those accustomed to the latest in communication technology, strawberry thief cases for iPhones and iPads can be printed to order. And since I wrote the chapter, this has just gone on and gone on. Some of my favourites now are the Google Doodle, which appeared for Morris's 182nd birthday, and this rather delightful little game produced for the iPad by Sophia George, who's a games designer, during her residence at the V&A. So to conclude, originally designed as a block printed chintz, Strawberry Thief is now applied to so many other objects that it offers almost as many meanings. To some, it represents idyllic summer gardens in England. To others, it means William Morris or arts and crafts or British textiles or even heritage good taste, while its more recent applications form that perfect juxtaposition of high-tech and the traditional. The iconicity of its design depends not so much on its uninterrupted production, but I would suggest on its continued reproduction on a variety of objects that range from coffee mugs to smartphone cases. Nonetheless, I'm sure that we'll all agree that handmade or handheld Strawberry Thief is an icon indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That was marvelous. And what I love is that both you and Róisín have shown us continuities, the continued links with the past and how things are adapted and how they stay alive for the future, and how connections with such different areas and, and their continuities are what we will probably in spite of the digital revolution, we will continue to see, because the hand and what is beautiful continues, as does natural dyeing. And that leads us on to our next speaker, Juhi, who talks about Thomas Wardle and his connection with India, his years in India, and what he did for the wild silk industry, which is now thriving in the area where our next speaker works in. So we now have Juhi Pandey, who is a craft and social design professional who facilitates community development initiatives of indigenous fibers and natural dyes, an alumni of National Institute of Design and the National Institute of Fashion Technology. She started her career in mainstream textile and garment export, then moved into the development sector. She has worked at Tara Trust in Goa, has been director of Khamir Craft Resource Center and Khamir Craft Society in Kutch, Gujarat, director of Hatheli Sanstha and Barefoot College in Tilonia, Rajasthan, and technical head of Neela House, Jaipur, a CSR initiative of JCB in India. She is currently center head for the Center of Excellence for Khadi in Northeast India, working towards innovation and development of wild Eri silk. Over to you, Juhi.
Thank you so much, Ritu. I'm going to quickly share screen and start my presentation. Can you see my screen? Okay. Thank you so much, Ritu, Saul, Carrie, for inviting me on this panel, and Emma and Róisín. You've just raised my curiosity further. As a design student, I have studied about William Morris. We've researched through a lot of his works, but this is new history that makes me want to know more. But another day. So I am here more to speak about what I say my current love, because what I do is because I love textiles. And over the years, I realized that the basis of any textile creation is the fiber, and which is very abundantly available in different natural forms in our ecosystem, and which has actually created a lot of social cultural spaces which have influenced trade and economies. And so here I am speaking about wild silk and wild Eri silk specifically, which is currently the fiber that I'm working with in Meghalaya in the northeast of India. So when Ritu invited me to be a part of this panel and spoke to me about Thomas Wardle, my only connect was knowing him because of William Morris's work. But I started reading a little bit more about him, and it fascinated me with how the influence of India and the silk, as well as the natural dyeing, was so intrinsic to his work that at one point of time, what I read in this particular blog by Claire Dudman was that he wanted to give up aniline dyes as much as William Morris did, and he was trying to find a new way. And he was introduced to these natural dyes through his father and his own travels to India. And one particular silk that he liked a lot, and his wife Elizabeth Wardle worked a lot with also, was Tussar silk, which is amongst the 3 wild silks that we have in India. And then to be able to relate the work that they have done, William Morris and Thomas Wardle, with the silks in the UK, but a lot of the silk had come from India to them, as well as the prints that were created were very, very influenced by India, made it very clear that, you know, we have it was not just in the ancient history of India and its traditional textiles, but there was a continuation of it even when industrialization took over within India as well as in the UK. And so moving forward and understanding how these textiles were created in the UK, but with a lot of techniques that have been a part of our traditions, and also in the space of the materiality of the entire process that was used, made me believe that there is, it's not just a trade route that was created between India and the rest of Europe or the UK, but it was almost like a material culture, material knowledge, as well as skill knowledge that moved through, you know. And here is where I say that, you know, India's been an ancient country and it is known for its heritage, diversity, and material culture. It is the only country with the largest number of living traditions, since the traditional textiles in India are a mark of the identity, the culture, and the society of its communities. Now, be it the Himalayan pastoralist or the white desert herders, or even the farmers in Tamil Nadu or the ethnic tribes of Northeast India, everyone has a very unique way of living, which is rooted in the environment and the ecosystem at large. So, and silk, the most luxurious fiber in textile, finds its home in India, both in its cultivated as well as in its wild form. And India is home to the 3 wild silks, which is Tussar, Muga, and Eri silk. They are wild silks because all these silks have been grown and are being grown in open biodiverse climates and not in centralized incubators. It is the varied plants on which the worm thrives, which give it that unique characteristic. And I think Thomas Wardle saw this speciality in Tussar, and that's why he liked it. It is also possible that he did not discover Muga or Eri silk, which are as old and as ancient as Tussar, because they were found further in the interiors of the forests of Northeast India, which in the 1800s was still an untouched territory by the British, whereas Tussar was found in the eastern belt of Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, which come under the Bengal province. And at those times, the British traders were already there exporting or buying natural indigo and cotton in abundance. So they were familiar with that region, the territory, and the people. So I moved to the northeast of India in 2021, post the second wave of COVID, to be a part of a project called the Center of Excellence for Khadi, as Ritu mentioned. and it's a design and facilitation center specifically set up for Khadi registered institutions by the Khadi Village Industries Commission, which is a government body. And the implementation partner is the National Institute of Fashion Technology. So we have 5 centers across the country, and I head the Shillong Center, which I'm pointing out to. And as you can see, it's the northeasternmost part of India, and almost just has a small, tiny little landmass that makes it connected to the rest of India. Else, we're pretty much out. And this is what makes this region very, very special. And if we understand the Northeast, we need to also know that it is one of the highest populated with ethnic tribes, nearly about 222 tribes. And their entire way of life, even till today, the 50% of the majority of the population still live very much rooted to their soil, their water, and their forests. And the wild Eri silk and the Muga silk are the primary fibers from this region that come out. Due to industrialization, a lot of modern technology coming in, the markets opening up, and the reach from mainland India to this part has reduced the popularity of these silks within the region, but it's still very much a part of the community's traditional clothing and attire across all the varied states that we know of in the Northeast region. And specifically, Assam, which is the main state of the Northeast, the Muga and the Eri exist. And the other states, it's more the Eri silk that's available, because Eri silk also is a very special worm. And it's also a very special fiber. I also call it the common man's silk, because it behaves completely different from mulberry, Muga, or tussar. We all know of mulberry silk and Muga silk, where we always relate silk because we've known them to have the sheen and shine and the luster. But here, Eri silk doesn't really, it does have a luster, but it's got a more softer bounce. This is because the silk is obtained from the silkworm, which makes an open cocoon. It's not a closed cocoon like the other silkworms. And this open cocoon is what keeps the fibers apart, and we cannot draw them as a filament. And it's very very recently I read this book by Karen Silk, In Search of Wild Silk, where Karen actually explains the Eri silkworms as lazy because they are slow and sloppy, and hence they do not really work hard to get the fiber out in continuous forms, and they take a lot of breaks, and that's why the cocoon is open. And it's fascinating because that's why you get a fibrous luster of this particular silk. And another aspect to this silk, which is all known again across the world, is that it's called the non-violent silk, or the ahimsa silk. And this information has been spread from a perspective that they say that the worms are not killed during extraction of the silk. The other silkworms, the cocoons are boiled, and hence the worm inside is left to perish. But this is true to some extent, but the story goes further. And I only got to know this after moving here and starting to live here. So it's true that the cocoons are not allowed to fully mature. And actually, if you allow any of the cocoons of the mulberry or the Eri, of the tussar or the Muga to fully mature, you can also get ahimsa silk or non-violent silk from them, because you will not kill the worm. You'll eventually let the moth or the butterfly fly out and then use it as a fiber. But since you want the filament, is why those cocoons are boiled. You can't do that in Eri silk because it's already an open cocoon. And so what the silk farmer, the Eri silk farmer, does is use that particular worm once it's completed its cocoon making and it's resting for food. It's a huge protein fiber content for food for the local community there. And hence, I'm still trying to find out when I go into villages and ask people, so were they rearing this worm for the food or actually for the silk? Or was it the silk that they discovered? And none of them really have an answer yet for me. I get varied answers. But the beauty of this fiber then, for me, is that it's actually fulfilling two basic human needs, clothing as well as food. So more than a non-violent fiber, what I term it now as, having now lived here for 2.5 years, working with these people, is almost a conscious fiber or a community fiber is what I'd like to call it. A little bit about Eri. So it comes from the word erenda, which is the name for castor plants, as it feeds on castor leaves. It is also reared on another plant called keseru in the local areas. Today, for a better quality and production, the rearers, who are mostly women, buy the DFLs, which is the disease-free laying eggs, from the sericulture department, and then rear them in their backyards. They keep a close watch on the progress of each cocoon and finally remove the worm once it's done making the cocoon and has gone into a resting stage, which they then sell in the food market. And it actually gives them more money than the cocoon itself, and bring the cocoons to the Eri Silk spinning centers. Sometimes in some remote regions, the cocoons are also bought to the local weekly market, and Eri Silk yarn traders come to these village markets and buy them directly from the women rearers. Usually, the women rearers are also the spinners of the yarn. The process is simple and one has to be just gentle. The cocoon is boiled and hence the fiber opens. They are then dried and finally carded together to form a long sliver, which is then the spinner draws into yarn using a drop spindle, or one of the oldest tools for hand spinning. Today, technology has created spinning mills in Eri silk yarn, but since I work in the development and preservation of the Khadi ideology of hand-spun, hand-woven traditions, along with safeguarding rural economy, the story here of Eri silk that I will tell you is about traditional processes. The yarn then is sent to the handloom weaver who weaves the cloth, and the entire Northeast region, the handloom weavers are mostly women. The count of the yarn spun depends on the skill of the hand spinner, but it can be spun as fine as 80s NM, which is 80s count cotton. But today, the number of hand spinners are decreasing, and it's only the seniors who are keeping this tradition alive. So most of the common counts is between 12s and 16 NM. Khadi Commission by itself has developed a finer, thinner yarn of 32s NM on its Ambar Charkha, which is basically a hand-drawn spinning machine with 6 spindles and 8 spindles. But it's still a much newer technology, and not many people are still using this technology in this region yet. The yarn, so when I started working here and I was introduced to what I call Khadi Eri silk fabric, which is in the states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh currently, I was presented by this fabric, which came to me as a very rough, coarse, non-drapable, with no color fabric at all. And when I had read about Eri silk, it spoke about its luster, an all-weather fabric. It keeps you cool in the summer, warm in the winters. But here I was a little baffled when I saw the state of this so-called silk. You know, the moment the word silk comes in your mind, you're only thinking luxury. And this almost felt like rough canvas. And I couldn't figure out what it was, because I had felt the cocoon by then. I had felt the fiber, and it did have a slight luster. It did have a bounce. So I knew there was something that was happening in the process, which has been introduced to these Khadi organizations, which was turning this beautiful yarn into such a tough fabric. So the first step that we did was to actually work on getting the feel right, because this was the yarn, and we could not really work with the yarn to begin with. We had to work with the heavy yarn. So hence we had to at least see that the fabric coming out was softer. And so we went back into a process of trying to work with scouring and finishing of the fabric to bring back the feel. And we did eventually achieve it to a large extent, realizing that in the processing of the fabric that the artisans were using and the organizations were using to get a luster, since it is called silk, they wanted to give a shine. So they were passing it through a calendering machine that added a chemical so that it came out shiny, but that the chemical then made the fabric stiff. So we basically had to kind of work with them and explain to them that, listen, it's okay if it's not lustrous, let's look at the real characteristics of its softness and its drapeability. And now, it has been accepted, and that particular process is kind of stopped. Not completely, because it's difficult to change people's mindsets, but it has moved to them doing 50% production with not using that chemical and just doing a plain calendering. The next aspect was of color. And Eri is one of the most organic fibers, since it is reared domestically and not in a farm environment and not in a farm or a centralized environment. So in order not to lose that organic character, natural dyes for color were introduced by us. The Northeast region is very rich in its flora and fauna. So only natural dye substances easily available in the region were sourced by us, including the moderns. And we found harda or myrobalan abundantly in this region. It's also used by them in their food, and alum as well. Apart from that, turmeric, red onion peels, in the Himalayas, the rhododendron flowers, teak leaves, tea leaves, lac, the insect, manjishta, were also colors that we found very easily and started introducing them to it. We also found indigo, a species called strobilanthus, but it's not really available in abundance, but we have done some experiments with it. And along with that began a process of teaching them how to dye yarn, as well as do fabric dyeing techniques like clam dyeing and shibori. And finally, it was about 3 months of a process of research, a lot of mindsets to be broken out of, experimentation and training, that we got a whole range of colors that we knew we could work with. And our first collections of garments, on-loom products, and home products were developed. So here are some. So this was one of our first collections. This is naturally indigo dyed with shibori and clamp. This fabric was that heavy, stiff fabric that was presented to us, and this was our first collection. It was a lot painstaking, but I think we were very happy with the results. Did it for youth, because khadi also in India is now looked upon as a fabric that's worn by old people. So we're trying to also figure out how to bring the youth to see that it's fashionable and it's trendy. So this was one of our first collections. The second collection was more to do with menswear, because again, khadi is related to women who wear saris and who are old. But so hence we did this whole collection with clam dyeing and natural black dye for men. And then the colors that we introduced to the khadi institutions were actually to make more on-loom products. And saris are something that have now again come back into trend in the Indian market. And we had to look at the first market that we want to reach out to, which was India. And hence this range was created, and we found out that the khadi organizations in Northeast had never actually made yarn-dyed, naturally dyed khadi Eri Silk saris. So this was one of the first collections after whatever number of years these institutions were in Northeast India. Stitching is not the best skill of the khadi artisans in the Northeast. It is also in relation to the fact that they are a community who always wore draped garments, men and women alike. And hence, if now from the local market, we wanted to develop, or they want to develop products for a global market, we just felt that the responsibility of a designer was to work using their primary skills so that they're comfortable and can adopt to new innovations. And so we created a whole range of home linen products. So these are some table mats and runners that were made. And this is a range developed by women artisans of a Monpa community in Arunachal Pradesh that live very close to the eastern Himalayan region of Tawang. They have only been weaving their traditional fabric for their own clothing, but were finding it difficult to sell it further to the local market and required some new ideas. So we introduced a whole range of throws, curtains, cushion covers, which they can easily make on their own in their spaces. And it is something that they never imagined that they could make. And we had also a challenge of shifting their way of thinking from very dark colors that they use, which is red, black, and white, to softer palettes. And I would say as an impact, and it's been 18 months of intervention on improvement of quality of fabric, introduction of color, understanding design. There are 3 institutions now with nearly a 40-year history or more who just made that old, rough, tough, Eri Silk khadi, who are now producing their own design saris, because it was a matter of going through the process with them, hand-holding them, and making them understand the simplicity of color and texture and a mix of yarn to do something which is innovative. And all of these are right now in production. They're not doing mass production, but of it yet. They just have 3 or 4 weavers who've got a hang of it. But for us, it is a new beginning towards, a new way of looking at Eri Silk and wild Eri Silk. The latest milestone, I'm very proud to share it. It's like 1 month back. Please don't look at the models. These are our first samples, which are just trial photographs. But it's the convocation attire for the Indian Institute of Management in Shillong. It's one of the most premier institutes of the country, who for the last 15 years have been using, sorry for me to use the word, but the colonial gown as their convocation attire. But something told them that they need a change, and they contacted us. And so this is a range of stoles and shawls, almost 560 of them, that one of the Khadi institutions are producing now. And it's kind of a historic leap for Khadi in Northeast, because they've never done something like this for any institution before. So it's a way forward. So, I just believe that it's these intrinsic qualities of purity, versatility, finesse that, Thomas Wardle saw in these wild silks of India and worked towards building a great market for it. And it continues to have that appeal. One just has to work with it, meditatively and sensitively, even today. And, I believe we're all talking about fashion, and now the new buzzword is slow fashion. It's not just about, saying slow fashion is making textiles in a slow process or textiles that take a long time. But actually, the true sense of it is when, a textile piece is developed, keeping the community and the ecology at its forefront in the making. And that's what Eri Silk has given all of us an opportunity to do. And, I thank you all for, including this story in the larger historic legacy of William Morris and Thomas Wardle. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Absolutely marvelous. And while you were speaking, I was actually looking through some papers that I had lying with me. And I found that in 1886, and at the Colonial and Indian exhibition, and just before that at the Paris International Exhibition, Thomas Wardle had set up the Silk Court. And it was first shown at the Paris exhibition and then in 1886, where it was one of the larger courts that were held at the exhibition. And he spoke about his travels through India and his work with silk. And I'll just quote very quickly from what he wrote. For he said that there is a great future in store for sericulture in India, and that is beyond doubt, if only the same energy were applied as that brought to bear on the production of Indian tea. The day would not be far distant when the silk centers of Europe would desire the skills of Bengal more than they do now of China and Japan. So many congratulations, Juhi. I think you're walking the same path that Thomas Wardle walked in 1880s. So this has just been an absolutely marvelous evening. And we barely have any time, but we have received some questions. And the first one is for Emma. Emma, the question is there evidence that Morris visited Leek in 1878, as Fiona McCarthy claims? So,
well, yeah, the sources disagree on this, and it will depend on who you read and whose letters you read, unfortunately. So Watkinson and Davis, both writing in the William Morris Studies, kind of say over 3 summers, and I wonder if that's the simple answer, that it's actually his visits to Leek start in 1875, in July 1875, and the correspondence is all kind of, quite formal to start with. And I know that he makes 3 sort of quite intensive trips. So I think that sort of 3 summers would have been the summer of 1877, 1875, 1876, and 1877. And I just wonder if they've taken 3 summers as 3 years and made that into 1878. But I would need to go back to the correspondence, which obviously is in Norman Kelvin's collected correspondence, and you can access it on Duke University now. The correspondence changes, and sometimes Morris writes quite rudely about Wardle, which is quite amusing, about their working relationship. But I think they maintain their friendship. But he just gets a bit grumpy about the quality of the work produced at Leek, which obviously is why he gets back to that. But yeah. They disagree, but that's what historians do. That's what they're supposed to do.
I have a question for Róisín. Given the close links, that William Morris had with Thomas Wardle, because there were block prints that were printed by Wardle in his factory, and there was a lot of learning back and forth with natural dyes. Would that be a connection that would interest the William Morris Gallery to perhaps do a curated exhibition somewhere in the future that linked Leek and Merton?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely something to be done on dyeing, because dyeing is such a kind of a hot topic. It's something that, Juhi talks about really, cleverly, and the pictures of the natural dyes that you have been using are really beautiful and really interesting. And I certainly think there is something about dye and about color that definitely could be an exhibition. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is because for a non-Western visitor, I think a lot of Morris's colors look quite dull or quite dark, and it's quite interesting because to a kind of traditional Western, sort of British Western visitor, you go to the gallery and you're like, oh, there's pattern, there's color, it's really bright, it's really colorful. But when we have groups from communities that are, have different heritage, for example, Caribbean heritage or South Asian heritage, everyone says it's so boring, it's so kind of dull, it's so dark, it's so gray. And that's really, really interesting. So I think this idea about color and how culturally specific that is, and also how it comes into taste. And, you know, again, in the kind of Western canon, white has always been the kind of color, you know, since Winkelmann, since 18th century art history. You know, we have this idea of white sculpture, which obviously is rubbish because the Romans painted their sculptures, the Greeks painted their sculptures, everyone painted their sculptures. So, you know, we have in sort of the Western art historical canon this sort of sense of good taste and monochrome and white and grey, and that sort of bleeds through into how people perceive fabrics and materials, definitely. So I think there is something to be said definitely for thinking about color and how it affects people and what it should look like and how that relates to kind of cultural context and the climate and landscape. And I think the dyeing is a really interesting part of that. So the short answer is yes. I mean, we're programmed now up to kind of 2 or 3 years in advance. But it's definitely something we've been thinking about kind of color and natural dyes and how we could tell that story and make it more interesting and explainable in a kind of a wider context.
Fantastic. I hope you know that you're being recorded and a lot of people are listening in from me. So I think you'll be held to this in the near future. There is one more question before we run out of time, and that is to Juhi. Juhi, you talked a lot about khadi. Could you just explain very briefly what you mean by khadi? Because the term needs to be explained to understand what it stands for.
Absolutely. So khadi was a term that was eventually created by Mahatma Gandhi during our freedom movement. But the word khadi comes from its original, which is khadar. And khadar was cotton cloth, which was hand spun and hand woven. But khadi as a movement that began for us, and it was the first movement towards the Indian independence struggle or Indian freedom struggle, was to do with promoting rural communities, promoting rural economies, promoting rural material. And one of the key ways in which Gandhi saw that we can achieve freedom is by having freedom to the cloth. And here, every home in India, wherever in the north, south, northeast, east, everyone spun and wove their own cloth. So the word khadi basically today stands for any textile that is hand spun, hand woven, and natural in fiber. We can't really do much about the dyeing aspect, but the main aspect is that if it's silk, which is hand spun or hand reeled and hand woven, it's khadi. If it's cotton, which is hand spun, hand woven, it's khadi. If it's nettle, yak wool, sheep wool, camel wool, whichever natural fiber that's hand spun and hand woven is khadi. The other aspect to khadi is that it is also connected to any product that is created or developed or produced in the rural communities of India. So that's the larger ideology, because eventually it was to do with building the local traditional economies and maintaining the local traditional economies. We can have another session on a longer aspect of khadi, Ritu.
Thank you, Juhi. Well, it's time now to close, and I just want to say it's been an amazing evening. A huge thank you to all the panelists, Róisín, Emma, Juhi, for opening up Leek Textiles and its connects with the wider world. Huge thanks also to our marvelous audience for being so participative, even though we couldn't see them or hear them, through your comments and your questions. And I want to also add, before we sign off, there's a small online poll that I will ask my tech colleagues to put on. But having said that, is that we plan another five talks over a period of the next 9 months, which lead up to the Leek Textile Week that is planned in September. So we would be very keen to know what the topics are that you would like us to tease out about Leek textiles, transformations, continuities, and under our umbrella head of from Leek to Liberty and via India. And we look forward to seeing you at the Leek Textile Weekend. All of you who can make it for the on-site programs, please do. And again, a very, very big thank you to you all. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.